And I got a lot to talk about today. I have a lot to talk about today, but good morning to you all that are joining live. And if you're catching the replay, good morning, good evening. So glad you are here. Grab your coffee, settle in. This is not a formal presentation. I know some of you have joined me live. You all know I have a teaching background, but that's not what this is today. This is not a formal presentation. This is definitely a conversation. And I want you to be comfortable because we're about to talk about might be the most honest conversation in a long time that you may have had in your career. Let's make it a true coffee chat. Let's take the virtual, let's up level it to a true coffee style chat where it is interactive. But before I get into this, I want to plant a seed, if you will. I want to plant a seed. Just one thought I want you all to carry through everything we discussed this morning. And I'm going to have a cup of coffee with that because we are chatting with coffee. But one thing I want you to carry through everything we discussed this morning, and there's a headline story that's going on that just almost triggered me as a career strategist. Why do we feel guilty for things that organizations that we work for, interact with? Why do we feel so guilty for the things that organizations do day in and day out? Y'all with me? Why do we feel why do we feel so guilty about that? Sit with that for a second. Think about the think about the last time your company or a colleague's company may have announced a restructuring or reorganization. This is corporate to college, so you know that's the vibe over here. We understand the assignment. Think about the last time your company announced a restructuring, a reorganization, a strategic pivot, all those buzzwords, a workforce reduction, a merger, a new 5-year plan. It's a new fiscal year. Did anyone in the boardroom feel guilty? No. Business per usual. And the reason I bring that up is we have to start operating our life as a business as usual. Why do we feel guilty? Why do we feel guilty for the things organizations do day in and day out? Did the CEO pause and say, I don't know, is it too soon? Are we being disloyal to our current structure? No, no. The CEO doesn't say that when they're in the boardroom. The lever for our life. They call it strategy. They hire consultants. They build models. They execute it. And we or you applauded the vision, or at least you might have accepted it. But hear me out. The moment you start thinking about your next move, something shifts. The inner voice starts to get loud. I like to say the inner critic. The inner critic starts to get loud. Am I being ungrateful? Is it too soon? These are the things we deal with. Am I being ungrateful? Is it too soon? What will people think? Maybe I should just wait a little longer. That guilt, and I know I'm coming in hot this morning. My coffee's hot, I'm coming in hot. That guilt, that hesitation, that quiet shame around even thinking what's next, that's what we're dismantling this morning. That's what we're talking about this morning, right? And that's one of the key inner, if you will, reflections that I discuss in my book, Choice Destinations. I call it, a lot of people think they're committing an act of treason for putting themselves first before the organization they serve. They have this guilt of wanting something different because they've been cheerleaded by family and friends and colleagues that through the promotions, through the climbing of the ladder. When you want to make a detour or a hard stop, if you will, there's a tremendous amount of guilt. And I don't want to make light of it because this is actually quite common. Because you want to make the people that rooted for you during the journey, you want to make them proud. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But we're dismantling this morning because here's what I know after coaching hundreds of professionals through workshops, virtual seminars, speaking through this transition. The ones who leave well, the ones who exit they're not the ones who waited until the guilt went away. Y'all follow me? They're not the ones who waited until the guilt went away. Sometimes you got to move in the messiness. You got to move when the emotions opposite of what your emotions are telling me. And that can be very difficult. The ones who lead well, they're the ones who decided to give themselves the same permissions that these organizations never hesitate to take. That's the theme of today. That's the thread. Hold on to it. We are the CEOs of our life. Now, I don't believe, if you all have joined me before, I don't believe in this idea of work life balance. I like to look at it as work life harmony, right? It's a overlapping, intertwined. It just is what it is, right? So the theme of being the CEO of your life is managing your capacity before you manage the capacity of the role, the title, or the organization that you serve. You can't pour from an empty cup. This, y'all having coffee with a friend today. Do y'all hear me? So that's the thing. That's what we're talking about. The title of today's session, I know I'm ready to leave, so why can't I make the move? We're gonna unpack that because now let me tell you what just happened with, for those of you tapped in here in the United States, to a major airline, Spirit Airlines. I couldn't help but talk about that today because it's trending so high. It literally stopped me in my track this week. It stopped me in my tracks this week. And I think you need to hear about it. And look, this conversation was, it was inspired by years of watching high performing professionals privately wrestle with decisions they publicly look confident about. It's the peek behind the curtain. And I want to be honest with you from the jump. I'm not speaking theory this morning because before corporate to calling, before my doctoral work, before all the fancy frameworks, I was already navigating reinvention in real time. I'm a beauty industry salon owner veteran. I was a 20-year entrepreneur turned educator and corporate leader, and not in straight lines. There's no this straight line linear career. That's a thing of the past. Nobody's staying in organizations for 20 years or even entering organizations thinking that they're going to be in an organization for 20 years. That's very aspirational in this market. So back to me, I lived this in layers. I know what it feels like to look successful on paper, hear me out, while quietly questioning if the role still fits who you are becoming. I call it being on the wrong mountaintop. This is who this conversation is for. So, Spirit Airlines, I had to come in and talk to you all about that today. They just shut down. Are any of you familiar with this story? Let me know in the comments. It's huge. Spirit Airlines just shut down for good. And it literally, people were showing up at the airport, boarding pass in hand, and they had a sign on the door, we're closed. That means layover flights got canceled. I personally had family members that booked and were coming in for graduation celebrations. Yeah, it just closed. I wanted to bring that into the thread of how we operate ourselves and how we think about the vision for our life. Because as someone who has worked inside a large scale corporation, I used to work for US Fortune 50. I was a top percent 1% performer in my last corporate role. So as someone who has worked inside a large scale corporate system and operational strategy and global trade, all the things, I immediately understood what I was watching when I was watching this headline news. Spirit Airlines didn't collapse because they stopped caring. Hear me out. They didn't collapse because they stopped caring. They filed bankruptcy. I want to say this became, I think it got on my radar about a year ago. They filed bankruptcy twice. They cut nearly 4,000 jobs. They tried a turnaround plan, if you will. They attempted a merger. And this is all just me remembering what was going on. They tried a merger, they restructured, they strategized, or so we thought, at every turn, openly, publicly, without apology. Here's the connecting point. Companies build contingency plans every quarter, but professionals, us, somehow are expected to emotionally commit forever. I want to tie that in. And I'll repeat, companies build contingency plans every quarter, but professionals are somehow expected to emotionally commit forever. How does that even make sense? I follow a good lead. And if a company that I work for personally was a US Fortune 50, they're deemed as successful. If they're building something every quarter, why are we committing to a certain career path without any agility built in, any ownership built in? Why are we committing to that forever? I hope y'all hear what I'm saying. I'm definitely dropping a replay on this for those that are coming in and dropping in a little bit later, because I'm dropping some gems here today on how we implement and use what we see in the news to improve our own quality of life. Now, look, I sat in rooms where workforce changes were discussed as pure strategy decisions. Literally, we had a people meeting. People were their pictures, their resumes. It was almost like livestock. I'm being totally serious. They called it people meetings. So I'm sat in the rooms where workforce changes were discussed as pure strategy. And then I've also been on the receiving end of those same organizational changes myself. Not only was I part of the ones making the decisions, but I've also been affected by decisions in rooms that I never entered, right? That's just the name of the game. So one of the hardest things for professionals to accept is that organizations are allowed to evolve strategically. This is how you, when things happen outside of your control, this is how you prevent yourself from being bitter or becoming bitter. Okay. But it's hard sometimes for professionals to accept that organizations are allowed to evolve and grow. And sometimes that means they're going in a different direction. If you know, you know. I've had a 15-minute Zoom call where literally my manager said we're going in a different direction. And I was laid off in 15 minutes right after closing $1 million contract for the organization. Okay. So that different direction stinks. But when this strategy happens, employees are often made to feel emotional for doing the same thing. Like you're committing, as I said earlier, corporate treason. Nobody asked Spirit Airlines why they were planning to exit. Nobody told them they were being disloyal. And nobody said, are you sure you're ready? Are you sure you're ready? Because the data drove the decision. They just strategized because that's what organizations do. So here's the question. I need you all to sit with this morning, whether you're catching this live, those of you catching a replay. I'm looking forward to some commentary on this. Why do we feel guilty for the very thing that organizations do day in and day out? Y'all with me? For those of you that keep telling yourself you're almost ready, hear me out. You're almost ready. Spirit had weaknesses long before that final collapse. The external pressure didn't create the problem. What it did, it accelerated what was already there. That's the part that hit me personally, because while I was building businesses and working full time, I earned not one, I earned 2 degrees, because somewhere deep down, I knew optionality mattered. Let me repeat that. Somewhere deep down in a few of my career stages and life stages and family dynamics, I knew optionality mattered. Optionality is the precursor to ownership. I wasn't preparing and making moves to escape. I was preparing to have choices. And some of you have been doing the same thing, quietly building credentials, networks, savings. Kudos to you for you all that are just doing the unsexy work, building the savings account, building the skill equity, the sweat equity for years. Here's the thing. Emotionally, you still haven't given yourself permission to think. You haven't given yourself permission to think strategically. Let me set that about your own future. About your own future. You've been almost ready for 2 years. For 2 years, the credentials are there. I literally have worked with professionals where they have almost $500,000 in savings outside of a 401k. They don't feel ready to pivot. When you put that up against, in America, in the US, the majority of households cannot sustain a $2,000 emergency. Where you have this individual that had over 400,000 in savings outside of 401k and did not feel ready. They keep waiting for a sign, a perfect moment, a number in your bank account that finally feels like enough. So here we are. After experiencing organizational restructuring personally, I realized that something changed everything for me. Stability and security are not always the same. Here's what gives me the edge, and I didn't feel it fully appreciate it until later. I was an entrepreneur first, as I mentioned earlier, before corporate ever entered the picture. I built the businesses before I had the title, before I had a badge or a benefits package. You with me? And what that experience gave me wasn't just a skill. What it gave me was risk tolerance. That doesn't mean I was running blind, but entrepreneurship put in my toolkit, I didn't know at the time, risk tolerance. I already knew what it felt like to bet on myself. I already knew how to think beyond the structure I was standing in. When I went to corporate, inside corporate, I was never fully convinced that the walls around me were permanent. Y'all with me on that? I never went into that rat race situation. Nothing felt permanent during my corporate tenure. That perspective, thinking beyond your current role, is something I now teach intentionally because not everyone, see who's here, not everyone, if you're with me, has that. Not everyone grew up with that muscle, but it can be built. It can be built. So that's exactly what strategy does. It gives you the same risk tolerance that entrepreneurs are born into on purpose with a plan underneath. That's the gist of an entrepreneurial spirit. If you definitely can relate, please let me know. Let me know if you can relate to what I'm dropping here today. Here's the switch. Meanwhile, your organization is planning, your company is restructuring, your industry is shifting, and none of them feel guilty about it. Strategy is not disloyalty, it is stewardship. And listen, if you're sitting with that right now, I'm almost ready. If almost ready has been your answer for longer than you care to admit, I want you to know that build your corporate exit plan. I'll be live on Zoom. It's a free strategy session. We run about 90 minutes and we're going to do the actual work together. I'll drop the link in the chat or comments, depending on where you are catching this replay. Grab your seat right now. We'll keep talking, but you can register in 60 seconds and be right back with me. Right? Because we're gonna unpack that. Here's the thing: Spirit Airlines, keep harping on that because I love to take real-time current events and turn it into a case study, if you will. Spirit had a plan. It just wasn't built on a strong enough foundation, as we see now. They emerged from the first bankruptcy with a new strategy, and it failed because the reputation deficit was already there. The infrastructure wasn't strong enough to absorb the pressure. So that image lives in the back of your mind too. I've watched brilliant professionals because people I work with are degree to the moons. They have their credentials. I work with second act successors. They are no stranger to success. I've watched brilliant professionals lead emotionally instead of strategic. And they spend years trying to recover, if you will, trying to recover financially and professionally. And because I spent nearly 2 decades as a self-employed entrepreneur before corporate leadership, I knew firsthand that freedom without infrastructure can quickly become pressure. Freedom without infrastructure, without a strong foundation, can quickly become pressure. My methodology, my philosophy, corporate to call it, came from watching too many accomplished people assume courage was enough alone. Too many professionals assume courage alone was enough. Let me tell you something. Your job right now, your corporate role right now, can actually become the funded runway for your next chapter. Let me repeat that. Your job can actually become the funded runway for your next chapter if you use it intentionally. That's the one reason I teach strategy before movement. Before making a move, we need a plan. Simple as that. The goal is not to leave fast. The goal is to leave with the infrastructure. You don't need more motivation. You need a specific next step. We are in the information overload era, meaning that you can go in Chat GPT and get any bit of information, plan, detail that you need. If millions of people have access to AI, why do so many businesses fail within the first year? Why are people still being laid off and not having a plan? Why are people not building income to support the bridge from leaving their role and building their business? If we have all this information, because it's not in the information. The answer is not in the information. The answer is in the implementation. Spirit Airlines, I'm going with this all the way through. They didn't lack the motivation. Actually, from what I've read, they're the only, don't quote me on this, but they're one of the only for 34 years had no plane crash on record for their whole tenure, which some of the competitors and the premium airlines can't speak to that. So they didn't lack, their operations wasn't shabby. What they lacked was the right foundation at the right time. Let me back up a little bit. When I started helping professionals navigate the transition from leaving corporate and building their own business, I realized most people, they don't lack ambition. There's people that say, Dre, I want to do this. I have this in mind, but they didn't have the structure. And that's why my work becomes less about inspiration. And that's one of my disclaimers. For those of you that are going to be joining me tomorrow at the Build Your Corporate Exit, that's one of my things. I'm not here to motivate you because motivation and emotions are fleeting. I'm here to help you build an infrastructure because my work is less about inspiration and more about helping you build strategic clarity, leveraging your skills, your background, your experience, and make the moves that actually that hold. And what's going to stick, I'll give you a precursor for those of you catching this before the session. What's sticky is what the market deems valuable or what another human being deems valuable. So I'm not interested in hyping people up to quit their jobs. I'm not anti-corporate. That's not my thing. I'm interested in helping people build sustainable next chapters. And one thing leadership research continues to back in research for me is strategic decisions create more stability than emotion reactions will ever. You read the books, you listen to the podcast, you've been inspired, and then you come home and thought, okay, now what? Okay, now what? That's not a motivational problem. That's a clarity and strategy problem. And yet you never tell a company they should feel guilty for getting a strategic. It's expected for them to have a strategic plan together before making a major move. Why are you telling yourself that? Why are you feeling guilty for planning something outside your existing role? I need to know. I've been both entrepreneur, figuring things out. I've been a corporate leader, middle manager, senior, all the titles, inside structured strategy conversations. And a difference between organizations and individuals is it's not strategy capacity. It's not. It's permission. It's permission, right? Organizations hire consultants. They run strategic planning retreats. They build 5-year roadmaps, if not 10-year roadmaps. They model financial scenarios before they make a single move, and nobody questions it. My platform, Corporate to Calling, exists because I believe you deserve the same level of intentional planning that organizations give themselves every day. You are not being disloyal to your employee thinking about your own future. That has to go. You are not being reckless by building a plan while you're still employed. Now, there's some people that, certain organizations, you have to move in silence and you have to be very strategic and have discernment about who you share your goals with. I will say that. But you're not being reckless by building a plan while you're still working. You are not jumping ship. You are doing exactly what every organization you ever worked for has done. This is bigger. I hope you hear me. In this market and where we're trending, and I'll make sure I talk about the data on what's happening in the U.S. Fortune 500 companies, which set the tone for American business. I'll continue the conversation. Definitely will. Right? But this is bigger than leaving the role. This is about designing work and leadership that align with your values, your impact and influence, and the life you actually want to build. I knew in my last corporate role that I would not dedicate 40 hours inside an office on top of 3 hours commuting each day, each of those days. I knew that was going for my life. What life do you actually want to build? Do you want to travel? Do you want to attend and not have to ask for permission to spend time with your loved ones? That's the conversation. We're deeper than resume talk. You can find that on LinkedIn. We're going deeper than resume talk. This is your life. This is your quality of life. You are strategizing. Give yourself the same permission you've given every company you've ever built for or worked for or partnered with. All right. I dropped some gems on the mind shift needed to actually transition out of corporate and start to do your own thing. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Tomorrow, I'm opening up a live and free virtual planning session. I'll be on Zoom specifically for all the things we talked about today. Spirit Airline gave us a in the face case study of how we should be looking at our own business. I'm continuing the conversation for sure. The exit planning workshop that I'll be facilitating tomorrow, it is built the way I wish more career conversations were: honest, strategic, rooted in real world planning, real life planning, not what everybody thinks you should be doing or what looks good on paper. There's a lot of people, and I've had six-figure success as an entrepreneur, corporate leader. There's a lot of people that's their North Star when finding a role, or even, and once you get into the 250, 300, can we just take a moment to think, what is the trade-off? What is the trade-off for a 250, 300,000 salaried US job? I imagine if the medium salary is 75% lower, I imagine the trade-off is very heavy. Now, there are some people that love what they do. So it goes back to what you value. I can tell you, once you get to that, I would say that range of 170 to 300, you actually have a bigger target on your back. When organizations, as I discussed earlier, strategize to reduce costs, be more efficient, to grow, to increase their bottom line, those managers, those leaders, excuse me, those leaders that are making those high salaries that we're seeing an overlap of AI automation. The target on your back is big. It's big. We're going to talk about all those things tomorrow at the exit planning workshop. Again, honest conversations. You're learning from someone who has navigated entrepreneurship, corporate leadership, the transitions, and rebuilding. I've navigated all of that firsthand. So I don't talk about fantasy exits. We talk about strategic positioning. How do you build this bridge from corporate? It sounds good and aspirational. Yeah, I want to start my own business. But what does that entail? And I'm not talking about setting up a business account or LLC. It's deeper than that. The shift from being in corporate or a private company or a W-2 for 5, 10, sometimes 2 decades, the unlearning and unwrapping to be the new founder, the rising CEO, that's a heavy unpacking, but it can be done. It can be done. And there is definitely high benefit to that. Build your corporate exit plan Thursday. Join me at noon Central. The link to join is in the chat. I'll drop it in the comments for those of you that caught the replay. These 90 minutes with me can save you months and sometimes years of rethinking, overthinking, rebuilding. You'll walk away with what I call an exit readiness score. We'll go over that, a pathway specific to your situation. And let's talk about an actual timeline. Yeah. Darius says, I'm feeling the weight of that for real. Let's talk about an actual timeline. And for those of you that have not watched my video on YouTube, 7 levels of leaving your job, I will be sure to tag that because there are levels to actually leave it. And what we don't want to do is make a decision out of desperation. That you lose all your leverage. I'll make sure I'll tag that down below as well. But we'll be talking about your actual timeline built on your financial position, your market leverage, not emotion. The emotions will be there, but they can't lead the story. Thank you all for tapping in live with me today. I really appreciate you having coffee with me all day. I didn't take too many sips today, but I really appreciate you jumping in and listening to this, let's start paying attention to these headlines and see how we can apply the lessons to our own life. Look, you've already built the experience. I know who I'm talking to. Now it's time to build the pathway. Meet me in the comments. Let me know in the chat. All the links. Join me tomorrow. Build your corporate exit. I'll see you all there.